Greetings, I'm Dev the developer.
And I'm Glitch.
Today we're talking about CSS inheritance, the reason you can set a font on one element and watch it spread to everything below it in the document tree, and the reason a border you put on a container stubbornly stays put there instead of cascading down to every child. Understanding which properties inherit and which ones do not will explain a lot of things that have probably already confused you.
Okay, I want to style a status page. Node diagnostics, relay statuses, that kind of thing. Lots of headings and paragraphs. I am about to set up the font stack.
Before you do that, how many elements are on this page?
I mean, a few headings, maybe 10 or 12 paragraphs, some list items, a couple of links, so a lot.
And you were going to write a font family rule on each one?
I was going to write it on each type. So like one rule for H1, one for H2, one for P, one for LI, maybe 6 or 7 rules total.
Write the HTML first, just the page structure. All right, good. Now write just one CSS rule. Put font family on body, nothing else, then look at what gets the font.
Just the one rule.
Just the one.
Okay, so the heading, the paragraphs, the list items, everything inside the section. They all have the monospace font. I wrote one rule and the whole page changed.
That is inheritance. The body element is the ancestor of everything visible on the page. When a property inherits, children do not need their own rule. They look up to their parent, and if the parent has a value, they use it. If the parent does not, they look up to the grandparent. They keep looking up until either they find a value or run out of ancestors.
So body is basically the top of the chain. If you set it there, everything gets it.
Everything that inherits, yes. Which is the important qualifier. Add color and line height to that rule.
Same result, the color and the line height spread to everything. H1, H2, all the paragraphs, the list items.
Font family, color, line height, font size, font weight, font style, text align, letter spacing. Those are the main ones that inherit. Typography and text properties broadly. The logic is you want your page text to be consistent. Setting it once at the top and letting it propagate is the same default.
That's actually a really reasonable design decision. You almost always want your whole page to use the same font. Why make everyone specify it?
Exactly. Now, I want you to add a border to the section element. 2 pixels solid, something visible.
Okay, the section has a border around it and some padding inside. Looks fine.
Now, look at the paragraphs and list items inside that section. Do they have a border?
No, they just sit inside the section. They do not have their own borders.
Now, think about what would happen if border inherited.
Oh, every element inside the section would get a border. The 2 paragraphs inside would each have a border. The list would have a border. Each list item would have a border. That would be, honestly, kind of a mess.
And if you put a border on body?
Every single element on the page would have a box around it. That is a nightmare. Okay, I get why border does not inherit.
Margin, padding, border, background color, width and height, box model and layout properties, they do not inherit. Each element controls its own box. That is a line. Properties that describe what text looks like tend to inherit. Properties that describe where an element sits or what its box looks like do not.
Wait, so is there a rule I can use to memorize it, or do I just have to know which ones are which?
The pattern is reliable enough that you will internalize it fairly quickly. Typography inherits, box model does not. There are some edge cases, but that framing covers the common ones. In practice, when you're unsure, test it.
Okay, I actually want to style this section differently now. I want it to look like a dark terminal panel, dark background. and I want the text inside it to feel like it belongs in there, not floating on the parent page's background.
Set a background color on that section.
Okay, the section has a dark background. The headings and paragraphs inside it are on the dark background. Looks right, but wait. What if I add an inner container, like a div that wraps just the list as a subpanel? I want that subpanel to match the section's background color.
Try it.
I will add the inner div to the HTML first. Now I want that inner div to use the same background color as the section. Since background color is on the section already, I assume it will just inherit it.
Will it?
I mean, the section has a background color. The div is a child of the section if inheritance works.
What did we just say about background color?
Oh no, background color is a box model property. It does not inherit. The div will not get the section's background color automatically. It will be transparent.
Test it. Set an explicit background color on the div that is visually different from the section. Something you can see.
Yep, the div is red. It did not inherit anything from the section. It just has no background of its own, which makes it transparent, which means the section's dark color shows through. It looks like it inherited it, but it did not. The section's background color is literally visible through the div's transparent box.
That is actually one of the most common sources of confusion for people new to CSS. An element looks like it has a background because the parent's background is showing through. They're not the same thing.
Okay, so I remove the red. Now I actually want the div to have the exact same background as the section. Not because I can see the section through it, but because I want to explicitly style it to match. And I do not want to hardcode the same color value in two places.
There's a keyword for that.
Inherit.
Set the background color on that div to inherit.
Oh, the div now has the exact same dark background as the section. Not because it is transparent, but because I explicitly told it to take its parent's computed value for that property. They genuinely share the same color now.
That is the inherit keyword. It forces a property to behave as if it inherits, even if it normally wouldn't. The element takes the parent's computed value, change that section's background, and the div follows without touching the div's rules.
Wait, so inherit works on any property, even ones that would never inherit on their own?
Any property. You could set border to inherit, and a child element would take its parent's border value. It's a way of saying, ignore what this property would normally do, copy what my parent has.
So it is like making the inheritance chain apply on demand for one specific property on one specific element. Every element that uses inherit for that property gets the parent value pushed down to it automatically. You set it once at the section level and every child that opts in receives the same value. I mean, it keeps the styling consistent without duplicating values. That is what I meant.
That is what it does. Now, in the other direction, say you have a specific element that you want to completely disconnect from its ancestry. You do not want what the parent said. You do not want what body said. You want the property back to the value the CSS specification defines as the starting point before any style sheets ran.
That sounds like a reset. Why would you want that?
Say you are building a component that will be dropped into different pages. Different pages have different base styles. If your component relies on inheriting color or font size from body, it will look different on every page it lands on. You'll want to give it a known starting point, regardless of the context.
Oh, so you are cutting the inheritance chain for that element entirely. It does not matter what any ancestor says. This element starts from scratch.
The keyword for that is initial. Set a property to initial and it reverts to the value defined in the CSS specification for that property, ignoring everything above it.
Okay, so the paragraphs inside the section lost the number CCE8 color that body was setting. They are back to black, plain browser black. That is the CSS spec's initial value for color.
That is the typical initial value for color, yes. Black on most browsers. Not the most exciting result visually, but it proves the point. Initial does not revert to the parent's value, it reverts to the specs value.
Wait, so if I used inherit instead, what would happen?
With inherit, the paragraph would look up to the parent and take whatever color the section has. If the section inherits its color from body, the paragraphs end up with the same color as body with initial. They bypass all of that and land at the specs value.
Okay, so inherit is do what my parent does, and initial is do what the spec says, forget about my parent. Those are very different escape hatches.
They are. And there's a third one that sits between them. Unset. The behavior of unset depends on whether the property normally inherits or not. For a property that normally inherits, unset acts like inherit. For a property that does not normally inherit, unset acts like initial.
Wait, why would you need that? Why not just know which one you want and use it?
Sometimes you are writing a rule that could apply to many different properties and you do not want to think about each one. Or you are building a utility that resets styles generically. Unset lets you say back to default behavior without having to know which category each property falls into. It makes the right call for you.
Oh, so unset is like the safe version. If I am not sure whether a property inherits, I use unset and it will do the sensible thing either way.
That's exactly how to think about it.
Let me see all three side by side. Okay, so unset on font family means inherit it from the ancestor, and unset on border means go to the spec initial, which is no border, because border does not normally inherit.
Right. The behavior is property dependent. Unset is not one thing, it's a conditional. If this property inherits, act like inherit. If it does not, act like initial. The keyword reads the property's nature and does the appropriate thing.
That's actually kind of elegant. Instead of memorizing whether each property inherits, you just say unset and it figures it out.
It is a useful tool for generic resets. You'll see it used with the all property sometimes, which lets you set all properties on an element at once. Setting all to unset will reset every single property on an element to its natural default behavior. That is a heavy reset, but it exists for situations where you genuinely need a clean slate.
Wait, oh, there's a property called all.
There is. We're not going to go deep on that today, but it is worth knowing it exists. It is essentially a shorthand that targets every CSS property simultaneously. Pair it with unset and you are telling the browser for every property on this element, if it inherits, inherit it, and if it does not, reset it to the spec initial. That is the nuclear option for resetting a component style.
I feel like that could be useful for when you are trying to deploy a self-contained component into a completely unknown environment and you need to guarantee its starting state before applying your own styles. Like if the host environment has all kinds of rules you cannot predict and you need to zero out their effects before you establish your own baseline.
That is exactly the use case. Components that need to be style isolated from their host environment.
Right? Yes, style isolated. That is definitely why I was thinking about it.
Let me pull the thread together. CSS inheritance exists because most of the time, when you define what text should look like, you want that decision to apply broadly, not just to one element. Typography and text properties inherit because text flows through a document and should be consistent. Box model and layout properties do not inherit because every element controls its own box independently.
So when I set font family on body, I am making one decision for the whole document, and inheritance is the mechanism that delivers it everywhere.
And when you need to break from that, you have three keywords: inherit to explicitly take the parent's value for a property that would not otherwise propagate, initial to cut out the spec's starting value, and when you break from that, you have three keywords: inherit to explicitly take the parent's value for a property that would not otherwise propagate, initial to cut out the spec's starting value, bypassing all ancestors, and unset to let the property's natural behavior decide which of those two actions to take.
Okay, so I have been writing font rules on every element this whole time. I could have just set them on body and walked away.
You could have, and that is the first thing to do when you start a new style sheet. Set your typography on body and let inheritance carry it. Then override specifically where you need something different.
That is going to save me so many lines of redundant code. I had a style sheet last week that was just the same font family declaration 8 times on 8 different selectors.
That is the problem inheritance was designed to solve. The whole point is that a decision about text styling belongs to the document, not to each element individually.
Oh, that is actually why body exists as a meaningful target. It is not just the outermost visible element. It is the place where you define the document's defaults because everything inside it inherits from it. It is the root of the inheritance chain for visible content.
That is exactly what it is for.
That changes how I think about body. I always thought of it as just a wrapper, but it is really a defaults container. Set your document-wide styles there and let the tree do the work.
Open up a styled sheet and start there. Set font family, color, line height on body. See how much of the page responds to just those 3 rules without touching anything else. Then find a property that does not inherit and notice when the chain stops. That is the lesson made concrete. Don't just watch it, do it.